Hello and welcome back to South Park Explained on No Bullshit. Today we've got another very exciting and very relevant episode to get into, one pertaining to some recent controversies and discussions being had about women's sports. This episode's also become rather popular this week for the ways it's attacking these subjects, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Things start off with another new intro for the show this week. Well, they actually use a joke TV show intro they made on South Park last year, one about the new characters called the PC Babies. For those who don't know, the PC Babies are the children of PC Principal and Strong Woman. And while those parental characters have represented the growing middle-aged section of social justice warriors and politically correct culture spreading across America right now, well, their PC Babies now represent the younger, more coming-of-age woke crowd. So while the babies are, well, babies, they also represent older kids, teens, college-age students, and even young adults who are growing up in PC culture right now. These are the types who get constantly offended and triggered and upset by anything that's even remotely not politically correct. Sometimes they call these people the snowflake generation, and well, the PC Babies represent this too, by constantly being on the verge of crying and freaking out in every episode they're in multiple times, and it's being done for various hilarious reasons. For example, at the beginning of this new episode, which is called Bored Girls, by the way, we'll get to why later, but early on in this, we get a few topical references and a woke PC reaction from the babies to them. In this early scene, the PC Babies get upset when they're watching Mulan on Disney+, the recently released streaming platform made to compete with Netflix. And while Mulan might seem like something the SJWs would love, it's starring a minority female who cross-dresses no less, but PC Principal actually explains why the babies are upset here. It's because Mulan is actually outdated now, and it creates a straw dog character that doesn't address trans issues properly anymore, or something like that. And before this PC Baby crying fit interrupted them, PC Principal and Strong Woman were discussing something else related to the main plot of this episode. Strong Woman is training for an upcoming women's sporting event, and she's looking pretty buff and determined about it too. But as you'll soon see, that Strong Woman competition isn't going to work out the way they all think. Before we get to that though, let's discuss the next scene and the B story for this episode. At the South Park school, the boys have started a club with a pretty funny title. It's called the Dice Studs Gamer Club. In it are Cartman, Butter, Stan, and others who enjoy playing these old-fashioned tabletop board games which tend to use various kinds of dice, of course. This appears to just be a sort of welcome distraction too, and a side story for this episode that dives into something nerdy and fun at first, but it also quickly ties into the main plot eventually too. In fact, right away we see signs of that when, at the first Dice Studs meeting, Mr. Mackey forces the boys to allow a couple of girls to join their club, despite them being pretty much against it. At first, the boys think the girls won't know how to play and it might slow them down and not be as fun, but as it turns out, the girls are actually really good at this, and they know all the rules specifically. But this then results in the boys not wanting to play with them again too, because now they will just lose at the games and get frustrated still. Back to the Strong Woman story now, because her tale is about to take off here. This section is what everyone is talking about this week too, so let's finally see what all this hype is about. Here, Strong Woman speaks in a TV interview before the sporting event begins. Things seem to be going well too until her new competition shows up. Now she will be facing a new transgender athlete named Heather Swanson, who has an eerie resemblance to a famous and fallen old wrestler. When Swanson is introduced here, it is revealed that she is an extremely muscular, bearded athlete who is also a parody of Randy the Macho Man Savage, a legendary wrestler and a bit of a TV icon too. He's known for both wrestling and his world-famous Slim Jim commercials as well. You know that old line, "Snap it to a Slim Jim, eat me." He used to say that. And in South Park here, this character called Heather Swanson states that she only started identifying as a woman just a few weeks ago. And eventually, Swanson easily defeats the other girls at this female competition to easily win the contest. Strong Woman unfortunately finishes in second place, which is a big letdown for her and her family. And this all, of course, is a pretty big parody of the recent trend in real-world women's sports. Transgender athletes who often transitioned shortly before the events, well, they have been taking over women's sports in recent years, dominating the winnings and also breaking many women's records, if you can even call them that anymore, with a straight face. Now, with all that said, there's a bit more to get into with this women's sports discussion here. You see, typically we just call them sports, right? When you go to watch the National Football League or NFL, you don't say you're turning on men's football. No, you just say, let's watch some football. Just like how if you're watching the NBA, you say, let's turn on basketball. And sure, these pro leagues happen to be all male, but most of the time it's not even because they have a strict guys-only rule there. It's because the pro leagues only take the best of the best. And in the world of most sports, the best are almost always 99% men. This is due to a variety of reasons which we don't really need to get into much, but basically it's because of biology, bigger bone structures, puberty, and it also has a lot to do with the testosterone hormone, which is more prevalent in males. Regardless of the whys though, it is pretty hard to deny this is true, and men dominating regular best of the best sports is also what's resulted in the creation of women's sports. Now, forgive me if this is too obvious, but I feel there is a need to spell this out now, since women's sports do get propped up and misrepresented by a lot of the pro SJW crowd and the mainstream media now. So while they never say this directly or point this out specifically, when say for example there was all that hype around the US girls soccer team winning the championship, while they don't like to mention this, I do think it's worth noting here for clarity. Basically, women's sports is like a minor league sport, or like playing AAA baseball or Bush League racing. It's a dumbed down, lower version of regular sports. Nothing wrong with that either, but it's kind of offensive when they like to pretend they're equivalent to men. And even sometimes, like with girls soccer, they try and say they deserve the same amount of money as men, even though their sporting leagues don't draw on as many crowds. And I'm not trying to be mean or attack their thing here either. It's just, this is the truth and it needs to be said. These women athletes could not even come close to making it in the actual professional leagues, so they resulted in falling back to the women's leagues, which a lot of the times is just a charity case that gives women medals and attention because liberals love to prop up ladies and minorities in order to virtue signal and feel better. I mean, the entire WNBA, the Women's Basketball League, is paid for by the actual NBA, and they've never earned money for years, ever. So basically the definition of a charity case. This also brings us back to South Park now, who is making fun of another new trend of how male athletes who can't make it in the pros, well, they just decide to transition late in life and take up women's sports instead. And they're now becoming big-time leaders, winners, and record breakers in that realm, easily. And, well, whether or not those transitions are genuine is certainly questionable, but even if we assume they are, these trans athletes are certainly taking advantage of things. They're using woke pro-trans culture, which is at an all-time high right now, and they're turning it back against the SJWs, who now can't even call this bullshit out on their own side. It's pretty lame and messed up, but at the same time, it's kind of fun to watch. I mean, these guys deserve this shit. They made this bed for themselves, and now they have to lie in it. And also, that's the whole trick of this episode too, and it's a pickle PC Principal and Strong Woman struggle with throughout the entire story. When Heather Swanson beats Strong Woman, PC Principal almost wants to say something about it not being fair in the car ride home, but he can't even speak freely among his own family because if he even comes close to criticizing a trans person, the PC babies will freak out. And then later on, when Heather Swanson visits Strong Woman and Principal at their own homes to brag about his victory, well, they get into an argument with PC Principal and eventually call him a transphobe. PCP is called this just for asking this person to leave his house when they weren't even invited in the first place. But even standing up for yourself and possibly saying something a little bit harsh to a person like this, that will get you called a T-phobe in a heartbeat, just as we saw today. And this tough position PC Principal and Strong Woman are put in is also the crux of this episode too. They struggle to balance their extreme PC principles, which are being starkly challenged by this crazed athlete, who is clearly taking advantage of the left's kindness and their unwillingness to challenge anyone who identifies as trans. Another one of my favorite parts of this women's athletic competition thing is the new original song that was made for it, and it's aptly called Strong Woman, which is said throughout. It's a good upbeat tempo workout kind of song that has funny lyrics in it too, and even it goofs on girls sports stars a little bit if you're paying attention, saying they barely break a sweat at one point in the song. This shows that South Park does understand that women's sports is a bit of a joke to begin with, and on top of that, it's being made into a ridiculous circus by these new opportunist women like Heather Swanson. Back at school now, Cartman and his other dice studs, they continue to struggle with the girls invading their favorite pastime, and now we could see how the dice studs situation parallels the women's sports one too. Both involve hobbies, pastimes, or sports, and the discussion about whether or not to allow both genders to participate in one way or another. But when Mr. Mackey and the school refuse to make tabletop children's clubs male only, this results in Cartman and company trying to go over their heads and pleading their case to the United States government. Here, Cartman even uses his friend Scott Malcolmson for leverage when he introduces Scott as having what he calls terminal diabetes, trying to get sympathy here. This stunt ends up backfiring on the boys though, because a little bit later, they discover the girls have started their own board game club called Board Girls, which is also the name of this episode. And as it turns out, The girls' club is much better, it's bigger, and it has more members and a larger variety of games too. It looks like more fun, but the boys are quickly kicked out of Board Girls when Mr. Mackey comes in and announces that the government has made these clubs gender exclusive now, giving the boys what they previously asked for earlier but now probably regret. Back to the PC family, who are still in disarray after the unwelcomed visit from Heather Swanson. Later we even find out that Swanson actually has ulterior motives here. Strong Woman actually reveals that she used to date Swanson back in the day, but after she broke up with him, he has held a grudge ever since and vowed to get back at her one day. And that day apparently came when Swanson transitioned in order to beat Strong Woman at that female athlete competition. And now he's gloating over his win and going on to win all these other so-called female sports events. This is a specific motivation for Swanson, and it also can be seen as a placeholder for other trans athletes taking over women's sports now too. The point is, they are doing it for other reasons, not because they think they're women or for the love of the game. And they don't think they're the best either. They just want to win at something for another reason. Perhaps for a payback reason like with Swanson, or for another personal one like wanting to finally win after losing in real sports for years. Or they also could be trying to get more money or attention or something else like that. Finally, PC Principal gets fed up with things and he goes on to confront Swanson as he's having another interview celebrating her success, this time winning women's mixed martial arts. PC Principal interrupts her on set though, causing another public argument. Here, PCP tries to address the issues of men going through puberty as males and then transitioning late in life in order to compete in women's sports unfairly. But he falls short here because of his politically correctness, which once again has stopped him from saying how he really feels. And then in the heat of the moment, PC Principal eventually lightly shoves Swanson, which results in her flopping like LeBron James and diving through a table, breaking it, in order to try and make PCP look bad and offensive. This works, and in an effort to make up for it, PC Principal eventually has Swanson come to the school and speak to the children about things in order to try and make things better between them. This results in a final and very funny and very relevant moment where Heather Swanson prances around speaking in front of the school children in a pretty inappropriate way. Swanson is already typically dressed in a very revealing way too, wearing skin-tight wrestling attire and having their arms and upper body exposed for the most part. But halfway through this new speech, and Swanson decides to take even more clothes off, and he does the rest of his speech here wearing a sort of male speedo, or what some might call a banana hammock, and in it you can clearly see all of his legs and male body parts too. Obviously this is gross and offensive and a totally inappropriate way to speak in front of kids at a school, but it's also really not too far from the truth and what's been happening in the real world in current year. Sure, South Park barely alludes to this, but it is pretty clear if you're in the know. This section is an obvious parody of all the drag queens who have been speaking to young kids at schools lately. While the liberals love to brag about this happening, many other sane people have been rightly concerned. Not only are drag queens taking over and reading stories to little children and doing other creepy stuff, but also they're doing it while wearing their sexy, revealing, sometimes exposing clothes while they do it. There was even one specific incident where a drag queen got in trouble for flashing his junk to young children, not unlike what's happening in this parody in this South Park episode. In the end, Heather Swanson finally meets her match though, when one of the board girls challenges him to a board game to see who really is the best girl there. Swanson inevitably loses that game, finally, and he walks off in shame too, joined by Eric Cartman, who perhaps will return with him in a later episode. Then, even later on, PC Principal finally returns home. He was afraid to go there and face his PC babies after the whole incident with Swanson, but as it turns out, the babies aren't actually upset much at all. They actually understand the nuance of this trans athlete women's sports situation more than PC Principal had thought they would. And the family is brought together again here for a long-awaited happy ending. Clearly, South Park is encouraging the left-wingers to rethink their strategies here, even implying that liberals at large, or the PC babies as they call them and as they're represented, well, they're suggesting they will likely understand the subtleties and nuance of these situations if you actually gave them a chance. Clearly, these newly turned trans athletes are up to no good here, and rather than continuing to cater to them and let them walk all over things like what Swanson did in today's episode, well, it's pretty obvious it's time that the left and everyone else, we all have a serious discussion about what's going on here. What do you guys think? Was this women's sports episode on point? Did you enjoy or recognize the Randy the Macho Man Savage reference here? And what about the PC babies? Do you think their storyline and introduction will return next week? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.